So it seems that we've now got 10th edition rules for the biggest baddest tank of them all. Let's talk through the Imperial Guard Baneblade datasheet in detail and what it can do on the table. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Imperial Guard once more, and I thought that seeing as Games Workshop has given us the new datasheet for the mighty Baneblade, it would be worth a video all of its own to dig into it in a bit more detail. In the video we'll talk through the model briefly and then look through all the 10th edition rules, a few thoughts on damage and durability and its special rule, and then talk about the synergies that we've seen within the Guard rules so far and how it might play on the table. I'm sure the Baneblade will be pretty recognisable to just about everyone watching, but this tank fortress is the really big Guard tank, an enormous steel behemoth just covered in guns, perhaps particularly famous and recognisable to people when you could play it in the Dawn of War series. The model itself is a bit of a beast as well. It's £105, €140 or $170 from Games Workshop directly. Definitely a fairly expensive kit there, but at least historically, if you were playing say a 2000 point game of Warhammer 40K, this would usually be around about a quarter of your entire army in raw armoured mass. The model generally is really quite a popular one among Guard players, a pretty iconic silhouette and has a rather enormous profile on the table, maybe often not the very strongest thing in the game rules, but still has an imposing presence. Fun little details on the kit are the tank commander, which I think looks particularly nice, plus a rather nice little reliquary power plant on the back. There was quite a lot of hype when these came out. I remember it dropping at the same time as the original version of Warhammer Apocalypse. The model can make any one of 8 different variants within the Guard Codex, lots of minor variations on the cannon such as the Hellhammer that also packs the Demolisher cannon, the big tank hunting Shadow Sword, or the Stormlord with its Mega Bolter, plus the ability to transport a whole load of infantry about. If you are willing to be a bit more technical, a lot of people enjoy magnetising them. There's a fair few tutorials here on YouTube for how you can go about making an Octoblade. Definitely a bit more challenging than some of them, I think. You could just magnetise between 1 or 2. Could be pretty fun knowing that you could field literally any of them though. If you are looking to pick one up at any point in the near future, Element Games has them here in the UK for a bit of a discount. Apparently they're just under £89 at the moment, so 15% off. Not a bad idea to order from a third party when the kit itself costs this much. For those of you over in the USA as well, Noble Knight Games stocks them for $154 it would seem. Both of those are linked down in the video description, and any purchases made through those links do help support Auspex Tactics and these videos keeping coming, so a big thanks to anyone picking up Warhammer models through those links, it does help out. Today though I thought I'd focus on the 10th edition datasheet for the thing. Quite fun to see the profile of one of the Imperial Guard's most exciting units. I'd say for the most part it's got a similar sort of theme and feel compared with the 9th edition version. A very tough big tank that's going to take an awful lot of focused fire to try and bring down, all the while spewing out some general purpose death. Starting out with its basic rules, it moves 9 inches now, a little bit less than the 10 it had before, but at least it no longer degrades. Might be a little bit slower than the other Guard battle tanks if they keep their 10 inches. It seems that despite being an enormous tank, it doesn't get any boosted leadership though. That's still leadership 7+, and it does mean that while it's not degrading quite as harshly, it does mean that it will have a pretty serious chance of taking battle shock. If it goes down to 11 wounds or less, it'll have a 42% chance to fail, and then not be any good for objectives, stratagems, or falling back. Provided it isn't battle shocks though, it's got an objective control of 8, so really quite a big threat to objectives. Definitely will be able to contribute a decent amount of points to holding them. Seems like it will be a very solid thing to hold a home field objective, but also could be good for pushing up towards midfield points, as usually Titanic units don't have the risk of being locked in combat to ruin their firepower. If you do get unlucky and roll that 6 to explode, it looks like this Titanic vehicle has got one of the biggest deadly demise rules that we've seen so far. D6 plus 2 mortal wounds to everything within 6 inches. I guess it's only going to trigger rarely, but if this thing does blow up in the centre of your army, then it's going to be an absolute chunk taken out of it. Probably for the turns that it is going down, it might just be worth wheeling at least a couple of units outside 6 inches to make sure it's not at 100% death sentence for the army. The tank has the smoke keyword, rumoured to be a core stratagem for 1 CP. If you need yet more durability, you'll be able to pop that, though Games Workshop haven't exactly told us exactly how it works yet. I'd guess it might be a -1 to hit via applying the stealth keyword for a turn. If so, that could definitely be pretty decent to get anything shooting at it with a ballistic skill 4+. Likely will be an efficient target for it. Finally, it does have the Titanic keyword as well. I'd be very surprised in 10th edition if it's changed too much from 9th, and I guess that the tank would still be able to fall back and shoot. I think it would be a bit unlikely for the Baneblade to have its main firepower locked up when tied up in combat with some mere infantry, though it looks like it might have to actually do the fall back and shoot thing now as it appears to have lost the turret weapon keyword on its main weapon, which means that you wouldn't be able to fire out of combat unless there's something else allowing it to do so in the core rules. Interestingly, it doesn't seem to have the towering keyword on it though. That was one that we saw on the Necron monolith, and it seems to be the one that is the thing that allows you to get obscuring terrain or not. That kind of implies that you might be able to hide a Baneblade behind obscuring terrain now, if you can find a bit big enough to actually cover its massive profile. Might be a small advantage in being able to hide it there. I guess it does have a profile that's kind of low to the ground compared with a bunch of other super heavies. In terms of raw toughness, I'd say the Baneblade has had a bit of a side grade compared with previously. It's gone up from toughness 9 to toughness 13, which maybe feels kind of equivalent for 10th edition, though it does mean that things like las cannons are going to be wounding it on a 5 now, not on a 4. Otherwise, it still has the 2+ save, though its wounds have been decreased a little bit, down from around 30 or 28 down to 24. This will mean that each individual Baneblade is perhaps a little bit weaker to things like Melter, which was already wounding it on a 5, but being significantly tougher to las cannon seems like a great thing in my opinion. It looks like the Baneblade is still going to be a pretty big damage sink for the enemy army to throw its firepower at. You need to get a pretty crazy 16 melter gun hits within melter range to take the thing down, or around about 24 las cannons, and it goes up far more for mid-strength weaponry like 54 overcharged plasma hits or 72 autocannon hits. I'd say for the most part that's probably just not going to be very efficient for the enemy's anti-tank guns. Either you'd need something truly enormous like a dedicated Titan hunting cannon, or to get into combat with it with something like a Primarch level character. For those reasons, I feel like, as with now, you might often just get a situation where the Baneblade's ignored and the enemy has to focus on the rest of your army, which does put it in quite a powerful position just to be able to sit back as a mighty anvil, handing out damage. As with other super heavies we've seen, it does degrade. It gets a -1 to hits when it gets down to 8 wounds left, which I think is a fair bit better than currently. It's currently -1 to hit at half wounds and then -2 at a quarter. Pretty good to know that your big super heavy tank is never going to be hitting on 6s anymore. And even the painful -1 penalty looks like it'll no longer stack with other -1 to hit modifiers, and that comes a little bit later too. I think the end result is it's going to feel a bit more reliable and dangerous right up to the end of the game. As well as all its guns, the Baneblade still comes with some mighty armoured tracks. These things though have been significantly toned down compared with previously, where before they were hitting at strength 9, AP 2 and damage 2, a very high chance of at least rogue killing a few space marines there. Now in combat it hits on weapon skill 4+, strength 8, AP 0 and damage 1. Basically it's now just good at killing light infantry, not really great against killing space marines and power armoured things. It's going to be a bit less tempting to charge it into combat after you've shot. There has been rumoured to be a tank shot stratagem in the core book which might help out with vehicles charging and trying to run units over, but it looks like for the most part charging it isn't going to be the best idea against enemy elites and things, but still potentially could be very helpful if there's an opportunistic infantry squad in its way. You could charge it, just tie them up in combat and rogue kill some of them, and then hopefully with the Titanic rules it should still be able to fall back and fire normally when it's your turn. Getting into the exciting bit though, and next up we have the big guns. In this version of the Baneblade it looks like we no longer have a turret weapon keyword, so no weapons hitting on a 3+ here, and it looks like they don't have the heavy weapon keyword either. Unlike the Shadow Sword's Volcano Cannon, looks like it doesn't improve if you're stationary. I guess there's at least the possibility that Lord Solar might still be able to order super heavies. In that case you might be able to get a ballistic skill 3 there, and if so that could be pretty powerful on such a big tank. In any case, this current Baneblade cannon is 72 inches, 3d6 shots, ballistic skill 4+, hitting at strength 12, AP 2 and damage 3. As with quite a lot of guns going into 10th edition it's lost a touch of AP there, but still is really quite powerful and generalist, a threat to both infantry and vehicles. It averages about 2 dead Terminators, around 7 wounds to a Rhino, or around 4 wounds to a Land Raider. The autocannon looks like it's going to be the new standard profile for those things, 2 shots at strength 9, AP -1 and damage 3. Quite an interesting new profile, a bit better against things like Terminators and light vehicles. Damage 3 does look kind of helpful for them. Perhaps the most surprisingly good looking thing on this profile though is the hull mounted Demolisher Cannon, which if this is the same profile for the Rust one looks kind of fun. D6 plus 3 shots, hitting on a 4, strength 14, AP -3 and damage D6. Really quite a potent anti-tank weapon, or good against elite infantry as well. It gets really quite a lot less shots than the Baneblade cannon, but extra strength and AP makes it almost equally good against heavyish vehicles. Its average damage is 6.3 wounds to a Rhino, which is scarcely off the Baneblade cannons, and then if you take aim at a target with toughness 12 and a 2+ save like a Land Raider, it averages 5 wounds to that, which is actually better than the main Baneblade cannon. Seems like it could be a very interesting and general purpose option for standard Russes if that is the same profile. I feel like with the damage split between those guns though, you really are going to want to get the Demolisher Cannon in range. It might mean that if you're playing the actual Baneblade as opposed to one of the variants, there is a bit more incentive to push up into the midfield as opposed to just hang right at the back. Then we've got to look at its secondary weapon systems. Seems that heavy stubbers for the guard now are rapid fire 6 or 3 now. They're going to be bringing a fair amount of anti-infantry on your tanks now. 6 shots at 18-inch range does seem kind of nice. For the sponsons, I guess that the first set will still be included. You get las cannons and a twin heavy bolter or heavy flamer. The las cannons seem to be the standard vehicle profile, hitting on 4s at strength 12, AP 3 and damage d6 plus 1. Going to be very effective against most armor, but not particularly against other things with toughness 13 or more like Baneblades. And then the heavy bolter and heavy flamer profiles are kind of the same as previous, but now you only get 1 profile for the gun, not 2, and they get to reroll wound rolls via the twin linked rule. Overall, I think that is going to decrease the relevance of the sponson guns just a tiny bit. Twin links just isn't quite as good as firing double the amount of shots as the enemy. It seems that the heavy bolter also picks up sustained hits 1 for extra hits on 6s, and the flamers get to ignore cover now, making them a lot more specialist at burning the enemies out of dense terrain. Certainly if you had 2 sets of sponsons, I feel like the heavy flamer threat could make this thing really interesting for Overwatch. If an enemy unit dares to stray within 12 inches of this, then he gets to throw 46 reroll wound rolls flamers at them, and that can be done at end of enemy movement now, even if they don't charge. Seems like the Baneblade would just be an extra good target for that, when you take into account all the other bigger guns that might hit on 6s. Again, kind of annoying that we don't know the points cost for the sponsons. It'd be interesting to weigh up whether or not the second set is really worth it or not. If Games Workshop balance it right though, hopefully it should just be something that sort of changes the theme of the tank, skews it a bit more to be a damage dealer from an anvil, and is something that you could comfortably take or leave. Next up we've got the Baneblade special rule called Rolling Fortress. This one's an entirely new rule for 10th edition, and it took me a couple of read-throughs to understand it the first time round, but basically it's the Baneblade giving other units in your army cover if their models are partially obscured by the Baneblade. Basically say if the enemy is taking aim at another one of your tanks and part of it can't be seen because the Baneblade's in the way, then your tank is going to get the benefit of cover. It seems to key off models as opposed to squads, so it's going to be an ability that works a lot better on things like tanks, and it's perhaps going to be easiest to apply against enemy squads that are firing at the vehicles. As there's a stipulation to ignore the benefit of cover, it means that literally every single model in that enemy unit must have full line of sight to the thing that they're targeting, and not one of them have the view partly obscured by the big Baneblade. It really seems like quite an interesting buff to me. Getting a +1 to your armor saves when you already have a decent save for being vehicles in the first place is rather nice. I'd guess that you'd usually get most out of it on things like valuable Lehman Rosses, tank commanders, or Rogel Dawns. I guess ideally something that the enemy really wants to shoot earlier and sooner than the Baneblade, as of course they're going to have the option of firing at that without getting the benefit of cover. At least in theory land, this could make something like a pleasing arrowhead formation a good idea. You have 2 Rosses following in the Baneblade's wake and getting the benefit of cover by nosing behind the back of it. Though in reality the Baneblade's already pretty massive and struggles to fit through terrain. In some more crowded battlefields you might just not have the sort of space that you need to deploy like that. Still though, anything less neat could still work. The only requirement is that the Rosses just need to poke out a little bit behind the Baneblades. It's often going to be possible at least to get some bit of the model able to see. Otherwise, we currently don't have the full detachment rules for the Imperial Guard yet, though just judging by the last codex and the units in the Guard army, there are potentially some units it could work with well. Perhaps one of the most important things that we've seen so far is that apparently you get lethal hits if you're stationary with the Born Soldiers regimental trait. It might depend on how you're using the Baneblade, if it's moving up the board to try and get that Demolisher Cannon in range, or to shield other tanks as they advance. It might not be the most useful thing in the world, but for one that's maybe guarding a home objective and just sat around with some heavy bolter turrets and things, that could be a very decent damage upgrade. I feel like having a Baneblade equivalent to sit on a home objective isn't the worst use in the world with objective control 8, though it might be a bit more of a question as to whether or not you want to field the OG Baneblade or one of the other different variants. I'd guess it's probably unlikely to get orders normally. I suspect it might need the squadron keyword, which it doesn't have, and it seems like fancier upgrades like tank cases are probably going away this edition. The biggest bet for getting orders on the Baneblade I think is Lord Solar Leontus. If he is able to order the great big Baneblade around, then a +1 to hit would be absolutely excellent. I think you're rarely going to get more value on a +1 to hit than giving it to an enormous great big super heavy, absolutely bristling and ballistic skill 4 guns. I feel like the transport variants could be kind of fun due to a big firing deck rule as we've seen with their preview, plus the ability to get units out after a transport has moved could be nice. You could ping more infantry onto objectives. I'd also be interested to see the Tech Priest profile as well. In 9th edition I think he's very playable in an army of tanks, just restoring a few wounds to injured ones as he goes about. Overall in game, I feel like the role of the Baneblade in the Astra Militarum maybe hasn't changed enormously. It's still going to have the weakness of the sheer size of the model being a bit of an issue. In some crowded tables it just can't fit through certain gaps. You'd have to think about what sort of movement lanes it wants to be able to advance in and where you deploy it. Plus, even if it can hide behind obscuring terrain, it might be hard to hide out of physical line of sight. There's probably just not going to be that many terrain pieces that are big enough to shield the entire thing. Depending on the matchup, I feel like you could probably play it either a bit more conservatively or a bit more aggressively. I feel like it's really not a bad choice for holding a home field objective point, objective control 8, and kind of unlikely to be reduced down to half health for battle shock anytime massively soon. And I think it's going to be rare that opponents' armies are going to be able to have the anti-tank firepower to deal with it at long range. It can be a solid anvil for the army with a whole load of massive guns, potentially getting lethal hits remaining stationary, and having some good lines of sight due to its sheer size. Otherwise though, if advancing, I guess that means that you'd be able to get the Demolisher Cannon in range. It could be interesting enough for shielding Russes with its special rule. It might be able to make good use of Overwatch, and I guess being a Titanic model generally means that you don't have to shield it quite as religiously from combat as some other units. Being able to fall back and shoot is a bit of good insurance. As with now though, I feel like it's going to have a lot of competition within the Guard Codex. All the other Baneblade variants for a start, such as the preview for that scary volcano cannon that we've seen. It might have been a bit toned down on the 9th edition version, but it's still going to be an average of 3 shots at strength 24 and damage 12. It's going to be far better at killing enemy heavy vehicles and things. It will be far less good than the Baneblade versions into things like Terminators or infantry. Perhaps the real competition though might be things like Lehman Russes and Rogel Dawn tanks. In general, it's often wound up that the smaller tanks just tend to be a bit more efficient overall, with the big tanks paying a premium for their perks and extra toughness. I guess we'll have to see how it shakes out this time. The main Lehman Russ battle cannon I do think looks quite underwhelming at only AP-1, but if that Demolisher Cannon profile does get on the standard Russ, that looks very interesting indeed. In any case, let me know your thoughts on the mighty Baneblade. How strong do you think that this thing is going to be in 10th edition Warhammer 40k? And do you reckon you could see yourself putting one on the table with these rules at the right points? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page too, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.